How does the most watched player in women's basketball, the one who fills arenas from Indianapolis to Los Angeles, the one whose jersey sits on the top of every merchandise chart in the sport, finish 11th in a vote of her own peers? That is the question hanging over the WNBA this week, and it is not the only question. There is a coach's press conference that split a fan base clean in half. There is a throat shot that landed the league on the front page for all the wrong reasons. There is a voting timeline that jumps in ways that raise eyebrows the moment you look at it side by side. And there is a superstar walking off the court holding her back while the organization around her tries to figure out what to say next. Every one of these stories is significant on its own. Put them together and you get a picture of a league that is right in the middle of the moment it spent 30 years building and might be actively fumbling it. So let us go through what actually happened, what the numbers actually say, and what nobody in the league office seems willing to address out loud. Start with the piece of news that is genuinely good because it exists and it matters. On July 2nd, the WNBA announced its 2026 All-Star starters, and the Indiana Fever placed 3 of them in the 10. Aaliyah Boston, Caitlin Clark, and Kelsey Mitchell will all start the game in Chicago on July 25th. It is the first time in franchise history that 3 Fever players have started the same All-Star game together, and it is the most starters from any single team in the league this year. Boston earns her 4th All-Star nod in 4 professional seasons. Mitchell gets the honor for the first time as a starter after 4 straight selections. And Clark, who is averaging historically unprecedented numbers for a guard, becomes the fastest player in league history to 1,000 career points paired with 500 career assists. The selection is deserved. It is a recognition of what she has produced on the court, and it holds up under any honest look at her numbers. But surrounding that clean, legitimate piece of news is a mess that the league needs to explain. And so far, it's not explaining much of anything. Because the vote itself, the one that put Clark on that podium, is where the questions start. Here's the timeline nobody in the league office is putting on a graphic. On June 17th, the WNBA released the first fan returns. Aja Wilson and Paige Bakers were the 2 overall leaders. Aaliyah Boston sat in 3rd. Breanna Stewart was 4th. Caitlin Clark was 5th with about 253,000 votes. A week later, on June 24th, the second returns dropped and the picture had reshuffled significantly. Boston had jumped to 1st with just under 684,000 votes. Clark had surged to 2nd with 670,000. Wilson was 3rd. Bakers had slipped to 4th. That's the last public snapshot the league released before the final tally. Then, on July 2nd, the starters were announced and the final fan vote totals were revealed. Bakers was on top with just over 1,045,000. Clark was 2nd at 1,023,000. In the 8 days between the second returns and the final count, Bakers gained roughly 405,000 votes. Clark gained about 353,000. Both are enormous numbers, but the league offered 2-for-1 bonus days baked into the final voting window, and the format allows heavy late swings that can flip a leaderboard in a hurry. What the league has not done is walk fans through how the 2-for-1 days shape the finish, or why a late surge of that size lands where it lands. When the mechanics are opaque and the fan base is already skeptical, silence is not neutral. Silence generates its own story. And right now, the story fans are telling themselves is not one the league wants told. Then there's the peer vote, and this is where the real scandal lives, buried underneath the noise about who finished where. Caitlin Clark, averaging historically unprecedented numbers for a guard, was ranked 11th among guards in the vote cast by her fellow players. Kelsey Plum, who was putting up almost 24 points a night on 52% shooting, finished 12th. On the surface, those results are hard to reconcile with what anybody watching the sport can see. But the story isn't really about where Clark or Plum finished. The story is about how few players actually bothered to weigh in. According to ESPN, out of around 180 players in the league, only 85 submitted a ballot, less than half. Teams were responsible for distributing those ballots to their rosters, and some Sparks players told reporters they never even received one. Think about what that means. The player portion of the vote counts for 25% of the final formula, and that portion was decided by a group so small and so scattered across teams that a handful of ballots could tilt the leaderboard in either direction. Whether the low participation reflects apathy, poor logistics, or something else entirely is a fair debate, but leaning on that result to declare Caitlin Clark the 11th best guard in the league is not honest analysis. It's a data point stretched past what the data can hold. And the league hasn't addressed the participation gap publicly. They just posted the numbers and moved on, as if a vote by less than half the electorate is a clean way to measure peer respect. It's not, and every serious observer of this league knows it's not. Which brings us to the on-court story that has been driving everything around it. On June 24th, the Fever hosted the Phoenix Mercury in the second matchup between the two teams inside of 1 week. Tensions were already high from the first game, which had produced 6 technical fouls and an ejection. In the second quarter of the rematch, Mercury forward Alyssa Thomas made contact with her fist to Caitlin Clark's throat area during a play that officials did not review in the moment. No foul was called. Clark tweaked her back on a separate possession later in the same period, kept playing through the half, and then exited in the third quarter unable to continue. She finished the night with 19 points and 8 assists in 20 minutes. The next day, the league office reviewed the contact, upgraded it to a flagrant foul 2, ruled it a non-basketball act, and handed Thomas a 1-game suspension and a $1,000 fine. Thomas served the suspension against the Toronto Tempo. The Fever released a statement asking again for consistent player safety enforcement, and Clark was left dealing with a back issue on top of the season already carved up by injury frustration. That is the incident, straightforward on paper. Except the reaction to what happened next from the Fever's head coach is what actually blew the story wide open. On July 1st, Stephanie White walked into her press conference and addressed the situation before the first question. She said the harassment Thomas had received in the aftermath, which by that point included what Thomas described as death threats, racial slurs, and her family being targeted online, was, in White's words, absolutely unacceptable. She said there had been too much toxicity, racism, and homophobia in the discourse around the league. And then she said the line that lit the fuse. She said, quote, "In my heart of hearts, I believe this is not coming from WNBA fans, Indiana Fever fans. I believe this is people who are using our league, using our players to further divisive agendas." She followed that with, "If you are one of these people who are online doing this, do not call yourself a WNBA fan." Now, here is where the story splits into 2 completely different versions depending on which fan base you ask. One version, held by mainstream basketball media and by a significant chunk of the league's traditional audience, is that White gave a clear, principled statement condemning people making death threats against a player and drew a line between real fans and the people using the sport as a costume for something uglier. In that version, White is defending her sport, and the line about divisive agendas is aimed at bad faith accounts and provocateurs who use women's basketball as content bait. The other version, held by a large portion of Fever fans, many of whom are the exact people who filled arenas and drove the ratings that gave this league its moment, heard something else entirely. They heard a coach dismiss legitimate anger over an unpenalized throat shot on their favorite player as bad faith noise. They heard a suggestion that they, the people who bought the jerseys and made the pilgrimage to Indianapolis, are not the real fans if their frustration got loud. That split reaction is the story, because it does not matter which reading you personally find more persuasive. What matters is that a fan base the league cannot afford to alienate walked away from that press conference feeling talked down to by the head coach of the team they built with their wallets. And the organization has done nothing since to bridge the gap. That gap matters because the commercial leverage of this fan base is not theoretical, and the league has already seen what happens when it flexes. Nationally televised WNBA viewership dropped roughly 55% during Clark's injury absence last season, according to Nielsen data reported by USA Today. Fever national TV games specifically fell from a pre-injury average of about 1.8 million viewers to 847,000 once she was off the floor. Sports betting activity on Fever games dropped nearly 50% inside a week of her going out. Those are documented numbers. That is what happens when Clark is not on the court, and it happens without any organized boycott at all, just the natural pull of an audience that showed up specifically for her. Now stack that against the current moment. The same fan base feeling ignored on injury updates, watching their star take hits without consistent officiation protection, and told by the head coach that their online frustration puts them outside the community of real fans, is being asked to keep showing up. Some of them will. A meaningful number of them are publicly saying they will not. Commentator Christine Brennan warned during the Alyssa Thomas fallout that the financial impact of Clark taking these kinds of hits will be substantial, and that missed nationally televised games cut audience numbers in half almost mechanically. The league is not being punished by mysterious outside forces. It is being punished by the basic economics of a product whose audience showed up for one player and is now being asked to accept a lot of collateral disrespect in the bargain. That is not sustainable. It's barely even survivable if it continues for another season. Now hold all of that against what Caitlin Clark is actually producing on the floor, because this is where the disconnect between the numbers and the treatment gets impossible to ignore. 21.2 points per game, 5th in the entire league. 8.2 assists per game, 2nd in the entire league. She became the fastest player in WNBA history to hit 1,000 career points paired with 500 career assists. 3 straight All-Star selections in 3 professional seasons. She's doing this while playing through a re-aggravated back injury. She's doing it while getting hit in ways that require league office review to correct after the fact. She's doing it while her own coach's press conferences generate more controversy than her actual on-court performance. There is no player in the history of the league who has averaged 20 and 8 for a full season as a guard. It hasn't been done. And she's doing it under conditions that would flatten most professionals in any sport. Now put that stat line next to a peer vote that ranked her 11th. Put it next to a league that hasn't explained a fan vote timeline that jumps in ways worth explaining. Put it next to a coach who cannot get through a press conference without alienating a chunk of the team's own paying customers. The gap between what Clark is doing and how the institution around her is treating her is not a small gap. It's a canyon, and the league is not building a bridge across it. If anything, it's quietly widening the distance and hoping nobody notices. Here is the truth the league does not want to say out loud. The WNBA spent 30 years trying to manufacture the moment it is currently living inside. The commercial momentum, the mainstream television slots, the arena upgrades, the expansion talk, the cultural conversation reaching people who never watched a possession of women's basketball before, all of it arrived in a rush when Caitlin Clark stepped onto a professional floor. That is not an opinion. That is what the ratings and the ticket sales and the merchandise numbers say. Every institutional decision that undermines her, obscures her injury status, marginalizes her fan base, or treats her commercial impact as an inconvenience to be managed rather than a gift to be protected, is a decision being made against the league's own interests. And there are a lot of those decisions right now. The vote participation, the officiating, the press conference, the closed practices, the injury opacity. Every one of them adds to a picture of an institution that has not decided whether it wants to grow or whether it wants to protect the internal culture it had before Clark arrived and shove her and everyone who loves watching her play into the corner. That decision cannot be deferred forever. The window on this moment is not permanent. Fan bases can be built quickly and lost even faster. And every week that passes without the league leadership addressing any of this in a serious, transparent, and respectful way is a week that fans lose a little more trust in the institution they were just starting to fall in love with. So the All-Star selection stands. It is real, it is earned, and it deserves the credit it gets. But the story around it, the vote nobody explains, the peer ranking nobody defends, the press conference nobody walks back, the injury updates nobody provides, is the actual story of where the WNBA is right now. And unless something changes fast, that story ends in a place a lot of people are not going to want to watch. Which leaves one question hanging over all of it, the question fans are asking on every timeline and podcast and comment section this week. If the greatest commercial opportunity this league has ever been handed is being managed this way in year 3, what does year 5 look like? What does year 10 look like? Because the numbers Clark is putting up are historic. The audience she pulled in is unprecedented. The financial upside for every player in the league, present and future, is tied directly to whether this window stays open. And right now, the people running the league and the team appear to be doing everything in their power to make sure it closes early. Maybe that is unfair. Maybe there are conversations happening behind closed doors that will produce a course correction. Maybe the next press conference from Stephanie White is the one where she clarifies who she meant and who she did not. Maybe the league releases a full accounting of the fan vote mechanics and the 2-for-1 impact and gives everyone a real answer. Maybe the player participation problem gets addressed publicly. Maybe. But right now, all we have is what has actually happened. And what has actually happened is a story that anyone who cares about this league should be paying very close attention to. Because the choices being made this month in press conferences and vote totals and league office statements are going to shape whether the WNBA turns Caitlin Clark into a cornerstone or into a cautionary tale. And the direction those choices are pointing right now, whether the league wants to admit it out loud or not, is not the direction its own fans are asking for.